and it just changed my life forever. We had such plans. We had plans to start a family this summer, and now that won't ever happen for me. Um, we like to travel. Now there's none of that. I mean, everything has just changed, and now I just spend days totally alone looking at my walls of memories on it and living in silence while these doctors have made all this extra money off of his death and living life like nothing has ever changed. They can go home to their husband and their children and don't even think twice about the lives that they have destroyed.
Imagine being with someone for 25 years. They don't feel well, so naturally you want to take them to get help, to a hospital perhaps. What happens next, no one would ever imagine. Your loved one gets taken over hostage. You lose control of being able to be involved in their care, and the unthinkable happens. You lose your loved one. Sounds like a crazy story, but it's a story that I'm hearing over and over again, and it's a story that's a reality for Stacey Ogrenzik. She's going to be sharing with us today. Welcome to KLIM.news. That's Christy Lee Independent Media. And this is a story that I don't like to share, but it needs to be shared because people want to sound out their warning. People want you to know in advance what maybe they didn't, that they just put too much trust in the system. Welcome in, Stacey Ogrenzik. It's nice to see you again. Stacey was joined by me at Grace O'Shara's memorial, another case of just a tragic, crazy thing happening to that family. But today we want to focus on you. First, why don't you just explain to me the sweet story of, how you met your husband and, how we got to this point.
Well, I met my husband when I was 15. We were high school sweethearts. We've been together ever since. And on November 22nd, he's had a little bit of chest tightness, and his pulse oximeter at home was saying that he was around 89 to 94% oxygen, so it wasn't horrible. I thought we could try to wait it out until we could get his home meds. Another doctor had given him, which would have been the ivermectin and the high dose steroids and all the things that he was later fighting to get in the hospital. But he decided he wanted to go about 4:30 in the morning. Thought that he needed to be seen, and I was really afraid for him to go, hearing about all those protocols. And I told him that day when I took him to the ER that I was worried that if he goes in there, I might not be able to get him back out. And he told me that he would be fine and that he assumed that they were only going to give him a steroid shot and some oxygen and probably send him back home. And he told me that he knew not to take remdesivir, and he knew that he never would go on a vent if they were to push something like that. But he didn't think that that would be an issue because he didn't think he was that bad. But we just didn't know going in there that that would be the last time that I was going to see him in person, like talking and able to converse with me verbally.
It's so crazy. I mean, naturally, I would think that if you went to a hospital, you kind of still feel in control of the situation, that, maybe you can see if they can give you something quick to help you and then get out. But that was not the case. It was like as soon as he was admitted, that was it. Is that kind of
Right.
how it went?
Oh yeah. Right away, I was asking a few days into the hospital if they started telling me that they were watching his kidneys closely. And but within that first week, end of the first week that he was there. And so then I began asking, well, was he given remdesivir? Because I had it on his charts that he said not get that. He didn't want it. He told you he wasn't wanting remdesivir. And nobody would answer me. They just kept
Wow.
brushing the question off. They would tell me that they don't have that information in front of them, that the nurses are in isolation. They'll have to call me back later. The doctor will call me back later, but no one ever would. Um, and I had had a real bad gut feeling about it. And so then I ended up contacting contacting him. I contacted the hospital one day and got a different nurse, someone I never talked to before. So I tried a different approach and made it sound like I was interested in him getting remdesivir, that I had learned that that was a treatment option. And I asked it as if I was wanting him to have it, saying, has he been given this? I heard that this was a treatment option. I didn't know if that's something he can get if he hasn't already. And that's when she looked at his charts and said, "Oh yeah, he was given that as soon as he came in. Like he's already been given 3 rounds of it." So then I knew. And by day 9-ish, somewhere around that time, between day 6 or 9, they started really having kidney problems. Um, and November 30th is when they began to push the ventilator really strong. And I think they knew what was coming with his kidneys failing. And my opinion, I think it's like a sedated man can't talk and tell of anything that happened to him thus far. Um, and his kidneys started to shut down. He had 6% kidney function. And not too long after he was ventilated, he was on continuous dialysis. And then all the problems just began from there.
It's just so unbelievable that you went into it. Both he said he didn't want it. You said you didn't want it. It was in the chart, and they just went ahead and and she admitted to you that they'd given it pretty much immediately. Is that the impression you got?
Yep, that was it. Yeah.
What was your concerns going into the hospital about that particular drug? Had you done some research, talked to people? What were the concerns you had?
I heard all the stories of other people having multi-organ failure, and then reading up on how it was created for the Ebola virus, and that in those studies it was something like 54% of patients who were given that had multi-organ failure, primarily the kidneys. Um, so I had knew going in that that was a concern and a risk that we just didn't want to add on top of him not being that severe to begin with. Um, and I hear all the stories of people not being able to get out of the hospital. And um, the only thing I didn't know, and I wish I would have known looking going in, was about them sedating the patients and giving them sedatives that would suppress their oxygen and making them loopy. My husband kept saying he was on something that was causing him to feel delusional and out of it. And nobody really knew what that was. And I'm not a medical expert, so I had no idea, and I assumed that was normal. But looking at it now, knowing now that they're giving people medicines that are suppressing their oxygen so that they have more trouble breathing, and just helps make everything a lot worse. I mean, no, never did you ever give people. I never went in for an asthma attack years prior and was giving something that was going to make my breathing more difficult, and especially not a vent to give my body rest while having an asthma attack. So yeah, the November 30th is when they began to push the ventilator, and he kept telling them, "No, I don't want it. No way in heck am I going to be able to get this. Am I going to get this? Don't bring it up again." He was texting me that his pulse ox was 98%, 96 to 98% range that day, showing me pictures of his monitor. So I have screenshots of that. And at the same time that he was telling me that, a doctor was on the phone with me telling me that I needed to convince my husband to go on a vent. And I said, "No, I'm not going to do that. His pulse ox is normal. He's at 96%. He was just talking about being without oxygen today and being double face masked, sitting in a chair. Obviously, he said he's feeling much better. Why would we do that?" And he told me, "Well, to be honest with you, we told your husband that we're going to vent him with or without his consent." And I told him that's illegal, and he hung up the phone on me, slammed it down on me, in fact. And I couldn't get a hold of my husband the rest of that day. I kept texting him, telling him, "No, I didn't agree to a vent. Please don't believe them if they're telling you that. You need to sign yourself out." And I wasn't getting no response. And I tried calling the hospital. They wouldn't put nobody on the phone with me. At this time, they still weren't allowing me to be there. Um, and so I found out 2 hours later, the same doctor had called me to tell me that they had vented him 2 hours ago, and that they had that he was vented. And then when I looked at got his phone much later, I saw that he was texting everybody around the same time, the same thing, and telling them how good he was doing. And it's like all communication just stopped after that point. So I assumed that the doctor had took his phone from him, so he couldn't talk. And prior to him telling me that he was feeling so much better, he also was saying that he was waiting for some sedative to kick in that they had given him, and that they thought would be helpful, and that they were going to lower some oxygen a certain percentage and see how he would react. So now, knowing what I know now about the sedatives, they were literally like trying to suppress his oxygen while trying to lower oxygen flow, and trying to create a problem. But they had that already mindset when they called me and he was fine that they were going to vent him.
It's just so unbelievable to me because it's hard to believe, and I think it's for people that have been unaware, it is hard to believe that a hospital could turn into a prison. I mean, there was like no way you could get him out. It doesn't make sense to me. It's still hard for me to believe. Obviously, I believe you, but I just I mean, I can see why you took him there thinking you would be in control and, you
Mhm.
know, you could refuse or accept or maybe have a conversation about treatment plans. But I mean, have you gotten an explanation for like how they're able to do this in terms of like once you get to a hospital, they can hold you prisoner? I mean, no advocate can say, you know what, we're going to check out now.
Yeah, no, no. And I think they're just bullying the patients to scare them into submission. And the whole reason they're keeping family away is so that no one can be a voice of reasoning for them while they're being, given sedatives, or they're feeling delusional and can't even make a rational choice. So they definitely know what they're doing, because they told me that I wasn't allowed to be on that floor with him. Because it was also a COVID floor, and they said it would be too risky for me to be there, even though I have antibodies to it. They still told me that they weren't allowed to let me up there. But after my husband was unable to speak for himself and able to communicate, then suddenly it was okay for me to be up there. They allowed me to go up there 12 hours a day and sit right next to his bedside and be next to nurses and doctors who have been beside COVID patients, all day. So suddenly the risk was just eliminated, only once my husband could no longer speak.
Now, you had some interesting conversations, things that you overheard from the nurses and doctors throughout this whole process. What were some of those things that you were able to observe or hear?
I was once I was able to get up there and sit next to him. A lot of the nurses would talk to me like I was a fellow coworker, venting their frustrations. And I had several nurses tell me, that these protocols are letting these patients die. I had one when I started to really pay attention to everything he was on once I was there, and everything was pretty much either fixing the problems from the remdesivir, to like a low dose steroid that's less than I take for asthma. I said, "What is he being given that's going to help him get better?" And the nurse said, "Well, nothing, but it's all that we're allowed to give him." They would tell me that politics are controlling their healthcare system and it shouldn't be, but that their hands are tied and that's all they're allowed to give him, even though there's other things that could work that they were just not allowed to. And then I had one doctor come in because I was starting to ask him about trying to push the idea of him taking his home meds, um, since they told me that things he was on was obviously not going to help him improve. So I started saying, well, then what can I do to get him on his home medication? He should have a right to use them. And they brought in this doctor. His name was Dr. Sharba. He came in and told me right to my face, that he would love to give him ivermectin or a higher dose steroid, that he thinks it would help him get better, and that he would give it to his own children if his children were sick and needed it. However, due to politics controlling the healthcare system today, his hands are tied, and he has to think of his livelihood and paycheck first. And I looked over at my husband's monitor, and I could see the level of sedation, on the monitor, and I could tell that he was alert and he heard that. And when I knew that he had heard such a statement out loud, that I just like a rage came over me, because I know how much it upsets me, and I can't imagine somebody who's now paralyzed, can't move, but mentally aware of what's happening around them. Um, and can't speak because they're on a vent. So I looked at that doctor and I told him, I said, this Christmas, when you're with your family, I want you to picture me beside my livelihood, begging you, a doctor who took an oath to do no harm, to put my husband's life above your paycheck. I told him that, most people come into healthcare to save lives, but now we know where you stand. And then I began to shame the nurses that were standing behind him and telling them that they took an oath to do no harm and they're just as guilty because they have to follow the orders of the doctors. And them just obeying these orders is not going to stand up in court, when they're held accountable for all these lives that they're murdering. And me standing up and saying something to that doctor and to the nurses results the next day in the hospital administration coming in um, with a police officer and took me down to a back room in an empty lounge and then began to tell me that they didn't like my attitude in the hospital, that I was affecting the nurses' care. And then they told me that another nurse had seen me going into other patients' rooms, and that's a safety violation. And at first, I was very upset and trying to tell them, like, no, that's not true. Why would I be doing that? I wouldn't put my husband's life in risk of getting anything, catching anything, giving it to him while he's in critical care. Um, and at first I was defensive, but then I realized, they have cameras in every room. They have cameras in my husband's room. They have cameras in the hallway. You have to get buzzed in to get into the ICU. So I realized that they know that that's not true. So that made me realize that they were just setting up a form of blackmail. Like if I don't sit down and be quiet and accept these protocols, that they would use that as a reason to keep me from seeing my husband until they were done with him.
Now, you did have like a glimmer of hope. It sounded like you had a doctor that started to get involved and intervene. Tell me what happened then.
I called patient relations and spoke to a Rhonda Jordan who told me that if I was able to find a doctor who was affiliated with the Beaumont system, that they would allow them to give the ivermectin or a high dose steroid. They said that there is nothing in their hospital policy that says that a doctor can't break the protocol if they decide that they need to. So she told me that they would protect their jobs, which was the biggest hangup, that most doctors were afraid of losing their jobs if they were to break that protocol, which they all thought was hospital policy, is what they're being told. So that one told me that there was nothing in the policy that says they couldn't. So then I was just on a mission to find a good doctor. Started making tons of phone calls, got a lot of no's, but then I started to come across a couple that were for it. One of them was the chief of staff, and there's another good doctor who he was a surgeon, and I told him I was talking to him and I was saying, this is where the situation my husband's in, and he's also a critical care team doctor, and he decided that if I had support, if he had support in the hospital, that he would do it, because he said he's seen some studies on this being effective, and what they're doing now, nothing's working. They're just letting him die. So he decided to go ahead and go forward with it once I presented some support that he had. And not only did he have other fellow doctors supporting him, he did have also the nurses. The nurses gathered around me and told me that they had my back in this, that I needed to fight for my husband, and that they also supported that doctor. They gathered around him and told him that they were so happy that he was doing this, and they thanked him for helping me, and then told him that he needed to do this. So that doctor decided to give him 76 milligrams of ivermectin, a higher dose steroid, and then high dose vitamins C, D, B, and zinc. And with less than 24 hours, his blood oxygen went from a low 64% to 112% originally, and then it balanced out to 100%, and then it stayed there. And his heart rate balanced out and came out normal. His blood pressure was normal. His pulse ox was ranging 95 to 100%. And every day he was coming off the vent more and more. And the doctor even said he'd never seen him be so low on the vent setting since Ryan was there. So he knew we were making improvements, and he was going to prolong it from a 5-day dosage to 7 to 10 days, seeing how well Ryan keeps responding well to it. But by day 4, they had Dr. Doss and Dr. Sundstrom had came in and revoked the order. They're both from infectious disease, and
It's
they
just
came
so
in.
unbelievable. He was clearly getting better. All signs pointed to that he was getting better. Why on earth did they involve themselves? Who gave that order for them to involve themselves and revoke another doctor's order?
Yeah, it don't make no sense because their hospital policy on patient rights say that you are allowed to choose your own doctor and that you're also right to refuse treatment if you don't want it. And even on the NIH, it says that those protocols should not be mandated and they should be the decision between a doctor and a patient. So like they pick and choose when they want to follow the NIH or the CDC or whatever. Um, and then she came in and it was a female doctor. She came in and revoked the order.
Unbelievable.
She put it in the notes that that they don't accept horse pills or veterinarian meds.
Which
uh,
shows that she's just watching CNN and has not done
yeah,
any of her own research. It's so
right.
unbelievable.
Oh yeah, and I
She
even
knows
had a
full well
pharmacy.
whether it works or not, she knows full well that it is prescribed to humans, maybe not for that particular thing, but how many times in history have we used off-label use? For her to make a statement like that, she actually put that in her notes in writing,
She did. She did.
is so
I even
unbelievable,
have that
so
recorded.
egregious, and such she exposed herself for just parroting the news and not even being able to think for herself as a doctor. It's unbelievable.
Right. Exactly. Yeah, she took him up for just false accusations. So I have even a receipt from the pharmacy showing that it's for human use. And they all knew that my husband was responding well to this treatment. I have like the nurses even telling me afterwards that yes, it doesn't make sense why they took him off of something that was helping him to get better. It'd be different if they were to say, it was making him worse or something was
Right.
harmful, but it wasn't, and he was responding well to it enough where the doctor wanted to prolong it. Um,
It's
and
still
so,
confusing to me though that these other doctors got involved if he was getting care. Like you still to this day don't know how they just interjected themselves into your case.
no, no, because they
Unbelievable.
never even contacted me prior to doing that or after. There was no communication that was even restricted from him from either of those two doctors. And one of them is the head of infectious disease. Dr. James Sundstrom is the head of infectious disease. And so he's never treated my husband before. But Dr. Doss, when she took him off of it, she signed herself off of his case. So it was kind of just a hit and run, and she handed it over to Dr. James
Unbelievable.
Sundstrom, and who never treated my husband before. And then no one ever called me to even tell me that they were doing this, and I was his voice while he was unable to speak. And they knew that, but no one ever contacted me. It took the good doctor that did the order to call me and let me know what had happened. Um, and then, of course, my husband started to decline in his health again after they did that. It took maybe about a day and a half ish for him to end up back 100% on the vent. And for his blood pressure to start going off the wall and heart rate starting to go bad again, everything going back to the way it was. And a couple days later, I had came in and seen that he was sweating profusely, but he didn't have a fever. And I knew something was wrong. And the nurse that was treating him that day was a new one I hadn't worked with before, and she wasn't telling me anything. In fact, she kind of came across very like harsh and non-caring at first. We got off on a really bad start. And so I called the good doctor that helped my husband before and said, I want to here's my husband's symptoms. This is what's happening to him. And he knew that he was going through a cytokine storm
Mm.
and had told me to hand the phone over to the nurse that was in the room. So I handed the phone over to her, and I heard him say that if we don't do something drastic, we're going to lose Ryan tonight. Um, and so then he ended up putting him on a high dose steroid again, 9 times the strength of anything he was ever on. And he was telling me, basically he's in God's hands. Let's see if this will help him get through this, because his oxygen was dropping, and it was very touch and go for about 17 hours. And he ended up getting better and making it through the night, restabilized, So everything that the doctor gave him again was starting to help him get through that. He
Mm,
even put him on Benadryl because there was some studies behind cytokine storms and Benadryl
mhm.
helping, and he knew that that wouldn't hurt him. So he said, "Okay, let's go ahead and just give that to him. We're going to try what we can." Versus the other people have the mindset of like, "We know this ain't working, but it's all we're allowed to do. We're going to just keep doing nothing." Where he had the idea of like, "Okay, if nothing isn't working, let's try something else and see if
Absolutely.
this," which is like how we did things before COVID. So Ryan made it through that night, and then I left for like 4 hours to go feed my pets because I was at the hospital 17 hours straight. And so I left just in that time when I knew that he was with a nurse who had been in ICU for like 40 years, and I felt safe for him to be there now without me. So I left for just a brief moment. And in that time, and that's all it always takes, is things always go bad when the family isn't there. Um, so he um, at right in that time when I was gone, the ICU doctor, Dr. Kierbeck, took my husband off of the steroid cold turkey because it's not.
Unbelievable. I mean, do they get like an alert that you're gone and just know that they can dive in and mess up the
It
treatment plan?
feels that way. It feels that way, and every story like mine, it's always after the family leaves, whether they
Exactly.
have to leave visiting hours or over, or they just step out for a moment. Just like with the story of Grace with her sister leaving to go take a shower and then everything going bad. It's the same thing. Um, when So yeah, they took him off of the steroid, and the good doctor told him that if you take him off of this steroid, you're going to kill him. The doctor didn't like that he said that, and then said, "Well, that's my patient, not yours." And I'm following protocol. And the good doctor had told him, isn't this, shouldn't it be about what's best for the patient versus us? Aren't we on the same page as saving Ryan's life? And he said the other doctor just shrugged his shoulders, like, that's not protocol, and I'm not doing it if it's not protocol. So there was no motive to save my husband's life. It was just obeying the strict protocol that they know won't
Unbelievable.
save. Um, so then, and then afterwards, and this was something I kind of didn't really know too till after. But the chief of staff got involved and had the ICU doctor concede off my husband's case because I did contact the chief of staff and saying that I want that Dr. Kierbeck removed from my husband's care. I want him to not even be allowed to go into his room because I fear for my husband's
Good for
life.
you.
And so they stepped in and they get him to concede off my husband's case, and then that chief of staff took it a step further and was making the good doctor be head of ICU starting the next Monday. And for the full week, he was going to have his team treating my husband. So now that I know this, I assume then that was all for my husband's sake, was so that that good doctor would have the say on what procedures was used on my husband, and it would stop the resistance on him surviving in that hospital. So it was like a last ditch effort to save him. Then, however, since the hospital knew that the good doctor would be in charge of my husband's care starting that Monday, that Sunday they seemed to put out all the stops to make sure that didn't happen. Because that Sunday night, my husband, then they had him maxed out on every drug uh,
Unbelievable.
of these lethal doses of like fentanyl and what was the other one, like Razdazepam or something like that. And they had a whole bunch of other ones that were really bad for suppressing your oxygen or um, making it worse for them not to be able to breathe when you're already on a vent. Uh, and so they had just maxed him out on everything. It was basically like a lethal dose, like euthanizing, like you would for a prisoner. And so I get in there. The good none of his so-called primary doctors or whatever they consider to be in the hospital, um, none of them ever called me. It was always the good doctor that made the attempt, the one that we picked for Ryan. So he called me and told me to get up there because he thought we were losing Ryan. And so then I went up there, and at the time I didn't know that that it was the Good Doctor's team with him. So when I got up there, I seen a whole bunch of new people I didn't know, and I think I must have showed like the fear on my face, knowing that I was seeing his numbers decline really bad, and they were trying to do an emergency prone to flip him on his stomach to see if they could bring everything back up. And I didn't know who those doctors were, and I was really scared. Like, oh no, here we go, another new set of doctors that never worked with him before, and I'm gonna be fighting for his life again. And I could tell that something was really wrong, and I couldn't tell like, who these people were, and I was scared for my husband's life. One doctor had come over to me and told me that he was with the Good Doctors team, and that he supported him 100% in everything he has done so far, and he just wanted me to know that. And he said that he was on Ryan's team or supporting Ryan getting better, trying to give me some comfort in knowing that he's on the side of good and not on the side of the rest of the hospital, and following all their protocols. And when he said it to me, um, I looked over and I made eye contact with this nurse that I had known pretty well there. It was one male nurse that he had that I had trusted. Because he always took really extra good care of my husband. So I made eye contact with him, and he nodded yes, like he gave me like a half smile and kind of nodded yes to reassure me that this guy can be trusted. Um, and then we waited. They tried to put him on his stomach, and it wasn't making him better. It was actually making him worse. So for the first time, usually on his stomach things would get better, but this time it wasn't. And they put him back on his back. And it was just kind of a waiting game to see if we could bring him out of it. But
And
like
I
the
mean, at
damage
this time, he was still on all like that mixture cocktail of fentanyl and all of the other drugs, correct?
Yeah, yeah. At that time, everything was already maxed out. They said that there was like
Unbelievable.
nothing else they could do for him. That his we could see his heart rate increasing drastically, and his blood pressure was dropping. And they said that eventually he's just going to have a heart attack, and then they were giving us the option if we wanted to do CPR or to not, even though like he was never a do not resuscitate, never agreed anything like that. And so being that the Good Doctor was there, they left it up to what we wanted to do. But he did tell me that as he sat there and started to cry with us, that he believed that Ryan was already gone, and that doing CPR on him would only prolong his death and not prolong his life. Um, and when I was up there with him, I could see his nails turning gray and his
Mm.
skin starting to turn. So I knew that what he was telling me was true. And I could even smell the smell of death on him. And I never said that to his parents, and I didn't really even say it out loud because I was trying not to even believe it. I was trying to hang on to hope that we could get him back.
I can't imagine the amount of betrayal you would have had to feel in this, not only in this whole process, but to this day, and taking a loved one to a hospital. And you're dealing with some people who are compassionate and supportive, and some people who just sound like straight up demons. I mean, to involve themselves in times when your husband was doing better. It's so hard to wrap your mind around things like this. And I think that that's why people struggle with believing these things and these stories, because they can't wrap their mind around that kind of evil.
Yeah, yeah. Um, I told one nurse that I was one time when I was sitting by him that I felt like we were trapped in like a horror film, or that we were stuck in some kind of death camp. That we made the worst mistake ever trying to come here. And I said that they're basically just letting him die, and I'm fighting against all this evil to make him have him survive. There's options for him to survive, and nobody's giving it to him. And I said we feel like we're trapped in a death camp, and her response to me was, "I agree. I 100% agree. You're totally right." So these nurses, they know what's happening. They agree to it. They know that um, these patients are not being helped and they're not given their full potential to survive. They're purposely lacking care, and everyone's passing the buck on whose fault it is. And it's like they're detached from reality, that they're the ones that are administering these lethal doses, and the ones that are um, not giving them thing or giving them stuff that they know is not going to help them recover, and then watching the families cry over their loved ones, thinking that they're doing all they can when they absolutely know that they're not. And it's ridiculous. And then the doctors just look like, they're blaming the hospital administrators, thinking that they're obeying a policy that doesn't exist. So everyone is passing the buck onto someone else and just thinking that it's okay to have the feeling that you're obeying orders. Um, and it's sad. They've ruined my life. I spent that day telling my husband to go home and be with Jesus and watch over me as this battle was not done, that I was going to continue to fight for him and speak out. Um, and then I was going to keep fighting until justice was served. Uh, and that's all I could say to him. But I played our wedding song um, for him one more time. And it just changed my life forever. We had such plans. We had plans to start a family this summer, and now that won't ever happen for me. Um, we like to travel. Now there's none of that. I mean, everything has just changed, and now I just spend days totally alone looking at my walls of memories on it and living in silence while these doctors have made all this extra money off of his death and living life like nothing has ever changed. They can go home to their husband and their children and don't even think twice about the lives that they have destroyed.
I mean, you said that you've even like struggled with feelings of guilt for taking him, trying to do a good thing to begin with, taking him to the hospital. How are you doing with that?
Oh, it's bad. It's bad. I feel guilty every day. Um, I wish I would have just forced it more for him to stay home now. Uh, he kept assuring me that he had this and that he wasn't going to allow them to do those things. And he knew not to be on events, and he knew to not go on remdesivir. And I can only imagine that they forced it on him. I know he would never consent to that vent. And the first week that I had gotten there into his room, um, he was on the vent now for I think 2 weeks when they finally let me in. And when I got in there, he had opened his eyes once for me. And this was even the doctors trying to tell me, that they didn't think that he would, if he survived, would he be normal? Would he maybe he lost too much oxygen, giving me all these scary what ifs. And, but when I got in there with him, I asked him if he could squeeze my hand, was what I asked first, and then he tried, and I could feel him trying to move his fingers around my hand, but his hands were like swollen like 5 times normal size and all the fluid built up from his kidneys shutting down. So he couldn't really squeeze my hand, but I noticed he was making a lot of face expressions, so I knew he could move his face. So I asked him if he could raise his eyebrows, and he raised his eyebrows for me. And then I began to tell him that I loved him and that I was fighting for him. And he raised his eyebrows again to let me know like he heard me and as if he was saying it back. Um, and then when I said to, I actually first he started to feel his tongue to his vent, and he shook his head no really really hard, letting me know like he didn't want that. But at the time I didn't know because I hadn't seen his text messages on his phones yet. I had just gotten them, and they were dead, of course, because it hasn't been on them for a while. So I didn't know. If I would have known that everything he was saying up to them venting him, I would have been probably insisting more that they were pulling that vent off of him right then and there. Um, he he tried to let me know that he didn't say yes to that vent by shaking his head no and touching his tongue to it. And as soon as I said to him, Ryan, I want to ask you some questions. Can you raise your eyebrows up for yes and down for no? As soon as I went to do that, and the nurse heard me. The nurse that was leaving his room heard me say that I wanted to ask him questions. She hurried up and turned around and came back to his monitor so fast and started upping his sedation really quickly. And it takes seconds to take effect. And so then he was gone and out in seconds, and they never allowed him to come off of that sedation again. So that was the only communication I had with him in that hospital. And they went from telling me that it was dangerous to keep a patient on paralytics more than 48 hours, or it can be dangerous or fatal, to keeping them on paralytics and sedations for over 3 weeks straight. They also never moved his vent out of from his mouth. They kept it from his mouth down his throat for over 30 days. Uh,
Unbelievable.
and they say that it should never be there longer than 2 weeks, or if a hospital knows that they're going to be on it long term, they'll put it in the first week because it'll cause erosion in the throat, damage to the vocal cords that can sometimes be non-reversible. And so, but they knew that I was wanting to move him. They knew I was in talks with some long-term care facilities, as I that was going to be my effort into getting him the right treatments, and getting his own doctor in there to treat him. Um, and since they knew that I was wanting to move him, they made sure never to remove that vent to a trach. And so that's what they should have been doing, was moving it to a trach, and they didn't. And they let him suffer for those 30 something days because that kept him held hostage there.
It's so unbelievable. I mean, so much of it is just so unbelievable, but it's crazy how so many of these stories are so eerily similar. And it's just hard to figure out who was giving these orders, and why so many people would follow them. What kinds of, when you hear these stories and you hear, how they were actually not following protocol as far as you were supposed to be able to choose the doctor and everything, um, and the lethal dose of cocktail drugs and stuff at the end. Same thing with the Shara family. I imagine you've looked into legal recourse, but has anybody been willing to touch it?
I do have one guy that I'm working with in Ohio, but he's looking for some attorneys in Michigan to work alongside him, because he's not licensed in the state of Michigan. So if he can get in touch with some other doctors, or not doctors, attorneys that are in Michigan, that would work alongside him. So far, he was one that was willing to try to move forward with something.
Yeah, I mean, I
So
know I know that they have a lot of legal protections under the CARES Act, et
yeah.
cetera, to just kind of do whatever they want, which is insane. What kind of financial burden has this caused on you? I mean, did insurance cover the hospital stay that didn't help the situation, or
His insurance did. His insurance covered it. He's still getting some bills though in, even though his insurance did cover his stay. My husband actually was an insurance agent, so he did health and life insurance. So he knew all that stuff. Uh, but now I'm down to just my income, and my income was hit really hard. And our state of Michigan, with our state governor, who did had my business basically closed for like 18 months for the 2 weeks to flatten the curve. So I lost like thousands of dollars out of my small business. So I was really dependent on him, and him floating me during all this whole shutdown that we went through. Um, and now that I don't got him, that's definitely a lot of financial strain.
so you do have a Give Send Go up fairly recently, right?
Yes. Yep. And I was using that for uh, to use it for anything with like campaigning to bring awareness for what happened to Ryan. Also help me get back on my feet through this transition of everything being just on me. And then using it for any legal battles that I have ahead of me, because I'm sure there's going to be a long haul in this.
Yeah. Any final thoughts that you want to share with others, to kind of send out a warning or
Oh, I would say definitely pay attention for the documentary airs because it's very telling. Um, always have a patient advocate ready if you are going to go into the hospital, have it notarized and ready, so that way they know that you have somebody else that's going to fight for you and be your voice. Um, and have patient advocates ready. Those are some of the things that I had to definitely do. And don't be afraid to reach out to any doctor in the facility to do the right thing, because there are people that will. A lot of people just assume it's just the doctors at the hospital, or that they're presenting to you for to treating your loved one. But they just need to be reaching out to everyone in there and finding that support, and make them show you that policy and say that if they're going to stick by this whole I got to obey policy and not let your husband or son or daughter or whatever get the care they need, to show it to you. And if they don't have it, then you have more ground to stand on and say, like, nope, then we're going to try this. It's their right to try this. Do something, otherwise you're just letting them die. That's murder. And they just have to be, if you can stay out of the hospital. I mean, my personal opinion, for me, I won't ever go into one unless like a limb's falling off. But but at this point, everyone's just got to do what's right for them. But just research, be informed, know what to look out for, and be your best advocate, because you cannot count on those doctors to be your best advocate. Their loyalty is to the hospital that's funding them, and that's it. That's where it ends.
Absolutely. I hope that they can make some headway in holding these hospitals and these bad actors accountable, because it's just heartbreaking to hear story after story of these things happening. Well, thank you so much for your time. And again, if you would like to support Stacey's efforts, please go to her Give, Send, Go and show her support.
Thank you.
Ladies and gentlemen, we have had quite a run here at InfoWars. We've had a huge, huge effect when it comes to the fight against the globalists. And we've changed the world together. And I want to thank you for all you've done over the years with your prayers, your word of mouth, and shopping with us and supporting us, while at the same time getting great products at InfoWarsStore.com. But now, because of supply chain breakdowns, and now because of all the Democratic Party funded lawsuits and the slanted nature of those attacks, we are maxed out and pushed up against a wall, just like America's pushed up against a wall. And we're being bullied, we're being brutalized by the special interests that want to get through us to be able to get to you. So if we put today's live show headline up on screen for TV viewers and ask the question, did Alex Jones InfoWars declare bankruptcy? Tune in and learn the truth. If you scroll down in that live show feed today, you'll find a subsection that's on InfoWarsStore.com, where when you click on it, it takes you to a subpage at InfoWarsStore.com where you can make a $5, $10, $20, $50, $100 one-time donation, or you can sign up for a recurring donation, cancel any time. But this is the time in the fight for freedom to understand they're going to take everything from you if you don't start spending time and energy in the fight. And I'm not talking to regular listeners that have supported us over the years, done a great job. I'm talking to new listeners or occasional listeners who need to understand this is a serious situation we're in, and you need to put skin in the game financially to keep operations on the air like InfoWars. Think of the millions of people that learned about ivermectin and zinc and vitamin D and hydroxychloroquine alone from this show. Think about the pedophile drag queen story times that have been exposed and stopped by this broadcast. Think about our border reports exposing the human smuggling that triggered congressional investigations. Think about our anti-war reporting. Think about our 9/11 in Bohemian Grove and our reporting on the globalists and the occult. I mean, to try to list our exposure of fluoride in the water and atrazine and the attack on our children with the whole transgender cult. Think about everything we've been through together and just imagine InfoWars not being there. So I want to ask you to go to InfoWarsStore.com, and every day during the live show, under the live show feed, we'll have a link to it as well, where you can donate and where you can buy products. And again, all the t-shirts, all the apparel, all the ball caps, all the flags, some of it going back, some of the stuff's been in the warehouse 5 years. Over 100 designs, great shirts, great ball caps, you name it. We're selling it all at cost. In the future, we're just going to have limited edition shirts for a limited time, only a few designs at a time. Because we can't sit there and pay for the larger inventory. We just can't do it. So, one-of-a-kind shirts, get them at InfoWarsStore.com. And the new Alex Jones Was Right shirt, very good-looking shirt. Big red thunderbolt, Alex Jones Was Right. On the back, InfoWars.com. This is a limited edition shirt. We're only selling this limited edition for 1 month, and it's $24.95, so we get $18 from the sales. It's really nice fabric. It's an expensive shirt for us to make to fund our operations. So get your Alex Jones Was Right historic shirt and know you took part in the battle of the Republic and the battle for free human will and free speech worldwide at InfoWarsStore.com or by calling toll-free 888-253-3139. And I want to thank you all for your support. The only way we fail is if you don't take action. When we get together and stand up against the globalists, we are unstoppable. I'm counting on you. Stay with us.